Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning here, President of Americans for Limited Government. Wanted to just touch base and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening in the gun control front. We spent a lot of time focused on a lot of other issues, but I don't think we can let the fact that Joe Biden thinks he has a lot more power than he actually has go by the wayside and just be ignored. We know a couple of things. We know that Joe Biden his administration has done two things. Number one, they went out to Monterey Park, California, and did a big media thing talking about how he was going to, according to their fact check, expand background checks. Here's the thing. He's not expanding background checks. The fact is, there's legislation passed last year, which the NRA opposed, but it was legislation passed last year that did provide some expanded background checks, primarily focus on people from the ages of 18 to 21, and included the requirements that if somebody who's 18 to 21 goes and tries to buy a gun, the NICS system, the NICS system, which does the background checks, will also have to reach out and try to get information from state juvenile authorities and the like to try to find out if that person should be ineligible based upon a juvenile record. They also have some mental health check within it, but recognizing that there's no mental health database anywhere, that's a relatively, is kind of made up. But so what you have is a bill passed last year. And now Joe Biden's going around talking about he's expanding background checks. No, he's not. The background checks were expanded by Congress, and he did sign them into law. But the fact of the matter is so he did a press conference about something that he's not able to do. His executive order, though, that he issued is problematic in some ways, in that it does a couple of things which are one are part of it's flat out lies, but it says that they're going to make sure that firearm dealers are actually going through the NICS system. Well, all firearm dealers are required to go through the NICS system. His executive order isn't needed for that. They're already going through the NICS system. There's no firearm dealer who's not going through the NICS system. The liability on it alone is prohibitive. So so that's just made up. Secondly, they're going around, and I'm just going to go through this. They're trying to change. He says he's going to clarify the definition of who's engaged in the business of dealing in firearms. Well, the law that was passed a year ago defines that pretty directly. National Shooting Sports Foundation said they worked with the Congress to provide a direct definition of it, and essentially it means if you're trying to sell guns for a profit, and you're doing enough guns that that makes sense, that's essentially what it is. So the Biden administration going and trying to redefine that is really, let's put it this way, contrary to the law, because the law does define it. Congress did define it, and they need to just follow the definition that's provided. There's one aspect: former federal firearm license holders whose licenses have been revoked or surrendered from continuing to engage in the business of dealing in firearms. People whose firearm licenses have been revoked, aren't eligible to engage in business already prior to this executive order. There's nothing new here. This is what he's trying to do. He's trying to pretend like he's doing something, but more importantly, he's going to empower ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, to go on witch hunts. This is really an empowerment executive order authorizing witch hunts to attempt to harass and drive dealers out of business. Way back in 1987, the Gun Control Act of '68 had been in effect for 19 years, and Congress addressed some abuses of power that the ATF were doing, and as related to raids on gun shops and the like, that were really meant for harassing purposes and were abusive. And those abuses of power came to the attention of Congress, and I worked on this, so I know a little bit about it. But so we passed something called the McClure-Volkmer Act that actually put some balance into the relationship between the federal firearm license dealer and the ATF agents to make it so so you had a honest process, and so this is, once again, just rhetoric made up. One of the challenges, though, and what they're trying to do with this is they want to publicly release the ATF reports on a business. Now, given the fact that people who are sent in to investigate businesses can find, oh, you didn't cross a dot, you didn't dot an I, you didn't cross a T kind of violations. What this is really intended to do is to try to drive fire FFLs out of business. It's trying to harass them and then go and say, oh, well, we don't like this gun dealer because maybe they're involved in the local Friends of the NRA. Maybe they've testified before Congress against egregious overreaches of the federal government. Lots of reasons, but it allows them to go off and say single out individual gun dealers who are following the rules and say, oh, well, we don't like it. You didn't have, one of your piece of paper was in the wrong file drawer, and they do a release saying they missed documents about people who are purchasing guns. I mean, this is the name and shame kind of approach is the approach that they use. But what's really important about this is not just the public part of it. It's the ability to, given the fact that we already have seen the federal government try to drop and stop gun dealers from being able to get to have access to banking. This is a means of actually putting people, targeting individuals, and then putting out a report, then gets utilized to debank gun dealers who are involved in trying to protect gun rights. It's very simple. That's what they're going to try to do. That's what they've already tried to do through the debanking procedures, and that's what they're going to do with this. And so that's the one part of this that actually means something is he wants to effectively release records on inspections. And oh, by the way, the gun dealer doesn't have a right to can't contest the inspection results. These are inspections that are going to come back, and with no ability to contest the veracity of it. So imagine you have somebody come through your business and they sit there and they're writing you up stuff, and they're incentivized to do so. And then you don't have an ability to look at the report and say, wait a second, this isn't true. No, it's just going to get released into your local press. And then you're going to end up having to deal with a bank who's going to try to debank you. And you're going to have to deal with a local city council who's going to say, oh, you're doing all this terrible stuff. But in fact, you didn't do anything wrong. That's what this is about. It's pretty pernicious and problematic. So that's the Biden executive order. It's by and large pretty meaningless, because most of this stuff is already happening. But if he's instructing the attorney general to rewrite the law that was already written by Congress just last year and to rewrite and expand it, then that's something that's contestable in court, because quite honestly, it's a pretty simple. Congress wrote the language. You don't get to just rewrite it because you don't like it. By the way, he signed the language, and he did a big press conference talking about how wonderful he was for signing it. So that's the executive order. You're available to get it. It's, if you just go to the whitehouse.gov site and you go on their news feed, and about 5 or 6 links down, you'll find the fact sheet on it. You can read all the stuff they're saying about it. I'd always encourage you to go do that so you can read what they're saying yourself, and not just rely on me as a source on this. The other aspect of how the Biden administration is going after gun control right now is the Department of Justice has been prosecuting a case related to somebody who was denied, had their firearms taken from them, actually, because they'd been accused, had a domestic violence order against them. And so the question becomes, is an order, a domestic violence order from a restraining order by the court, is it in and of itself proof enough to be able to deny somebody their constitutional rights? The entire idea of red flag laws kind of fly into this arena, because ultimately, if somebody says, "Gee, I think this person is doing something, I don't like what they're doing. I think they're in some way, shape, or form need to have the firearms taken from them for their safety of themselves or others." You're basically at the mercy of any Karen on the block and I use that advisedly because my wife's name is Karen and she really hates that term. And so I apologize, dear, but I just used it. The But any busybody on the block, if you're in a divorce proceeding and it's getting ugly as they tend to do, you know, you can have somebody, male or female, say this person's a threat to themselves or others, and the courts would go in and confiscate their guns, send the police to confiscate their guns. And you don't have any chance to defend yourself. You're guilty until proven innocent with those things. And so it's a fundamental question of whether or not your constitutional rights can be violated based on a testimony without the ability to actually confront your accuser and to create and defend yourself. That's what red flag laws do. And a lot of Republicans were too scared to actually stand up and tell the truth about them. But that's what they do. And so there's a question in the courts about whether or not the government can in fact deny somebody their ability to have a gun based on a restraining order. The answer to that question is, the Fifth Circuit said, no, they can't. The federal government can't do that. And local and state governments can't do that. It's a violation of the Constitution based on the Brune decision that just came out from the Supreme Court. The Merrick Garland DOJ obviously is now appealing that, saying we need it expedited to the very front of the pile at the Supreme Court because this is an issue that's so important that we need to have clarity on what Brune meant. Well, the Supreme Court wrote what they meant. And, just because the Department of Justice doesn't like what they wrote, doesn't mean they get to keep litigating it. And that's what they're doing. So we're going to see a lot about that in the next year or so. Ultimately where we're at, and I think a lot of the comments here are indicative of this. I think it's instructive. The left never gives up. The Supreme Court held that the First or the Second Amendment is an individual right. The Supreme Court ruled that, yes, you have a right to carry. Says so, it means it. And yet, the left comes in and says, well, we don't believe that, and we're gonna relitigate it, and we're gonna fight it, and so there's never a settled law for the left. The only settled law is when is errant Supreme Court decisions that don't go their way. So it's just instructive in this regard. The other piece of this that I think is significant is Joe Biden in his executive order used a criminal act as a justification for doing an executive order that, while that goes beyond what he's allowed to do under the law. But the question is this: if he's so darn concerned about violent crime in this country, why is he allowing criminals to come across the border every single day from Mexico? Why is he allowing the drug cartels to run their soldiers onto our streets and engage in violence? Why is he doesn't care about the flow of drugs, which are a proximate cause of violence? The trading in drugs on the streets is a proximate cause of violence. Why doesn't he care about the fact that you effectively have a border that has absolutely no ability to control the violent people coming across it, including terrorists? He wants to sit there and talk about, gee whiz, we want to do something about violence in the country. Well, if you want to do something about violence, how about keeping violent people out of the country? How about keeping people who are running the drugs out of our country? How about shutting down, going after those cartels who are actually the fonts of the human trafficking networks we're seeing and the drug networks we're seeing? How about going after those multi-billion-dollar businesses that are making $13 billion a year on human trafficking alone? That's slavery, by the way. Human trafficking is slave trade. That's what it is. It's how it's defined. I don't make this up. So how about going after that? How about going after prosecutors who won't prosecute violent criminals? How about going after taking on defund the police crowd and say, no, we're not defunding the police. We're gonna make certain the police that we have the police on the streets. How about going back to the Rudy Giuliani broken windows policies, which basically targeted police on the areas where the crimes were occurring at a time frame to try to interdict the criminal actions before it became a nest of crime? How about doing that? There's lots of things that are proven to work. One thing that's proven to work: if somebody's caught with a gun used in a crime, particularly a drug offense, put them in jail for an extended sentence. Hold your U.S. prosecutors accountable to do that. Don't let them trade it out. You want to get at criminals who use guns, there's lots of ways to do so. In the 1970s and 1980s, we had a crime wave in this country. It was cocaine-fueled crime wave. We had shows like Miami Vice on TV. We had Don Johnson and other people in cool outfits and a lot of pastels, riding around in cool cars, fighting as DEA agents or something. But you know what? What ended the crime wave was the legislature said, if we put people in jail who use a gun in a crime, we put them in jail for an extra long time, make sure they're in jail. The people who are most likely to commit violent crimes aren't running on the streets. And as a result, the crime rate went down. We also started passing concealed carry laws in this country. Florida passed concealed carry law in 1987, and the crime rate immediately started dropping. In fact, the homicide rate was cut almost in half within 5 years. Why? Because Florida violent criminals understood a simple thing. If they had a gun and they were confronting a civilian with it, there was a darn good chance they were going to get shot. And they said, maybe I'm not going to pull a gun. Maybe I'm not going to confront people. Maybe I'll figure out a nonviolent way to commit crime. You know what? It had an effect. And the effect was not blood running on the streets, as the left claimed. The effect was we cut the homicide rate almost in half because law-abiding citizens weren't shooting people. But the only people law-abiding citizens shot were people who were threatening their harm to provide harm to them. And the criminals didn't like the idea that they were getting shot. So guess what they did? They stopped attacking law-abiding citizens. Amazing. What a concept. So folks, Joe Biden puts all this garbage out there. And I just want you to always remember, if you really cared about crime, he'd start dealing with the criminals and the criminal elements that his DOJ doesn't believe ought to be prosecuted, and that the Soros prosecutors are letting out every single day of the week with no regard for the safety of the public. Who people like the Minneapolis City Council and mayor say, we don't need police. We try to defund all the police. And now they're saying, oh, we need police. Same thing in San Francisco, same thing throughout this country, where we've allowed prosecutors backed by George Soros and local officials backed by George Soros to become the protectors of our communities. And they're really nothing more, nothing less than protectors of the criminal element in an attempt to destroy the rule of law in this country and to make us all victims, and then blame those of us who own guns, those of us who take the affirmative idea that I'm going to protect my own family. I'm going to protect myself. If I'm protect myself, I'm going to exercise my constitutional right. They let the criminals loose, and then they blame us when the crime rate goes up. I'm sick of it, and I think you are too. This is Rick Manning, President Americans for Limited Government. Appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you again tomorrow.